David, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to start with why you're here, which is the theme Youth in Change. What does that mean to you, and how do you embody it?
The theme Youth and Change means to me young people standing up to challenge corruption, because that's basically our job as young people, is to challenge the status quo, to fight for what's idealistic, to change what's realistic, because that's the only thing that ever has.
And how do you embody that? How have you, in your life, in the past, going forward, how do you plan to carry that mission out?
By continuing to make sure that youth have as easy as a time as possible to go out and vote and make their voices heard, and also to make sure that young people, if they truly feel that they're not being represented, are capable and able to run for office should the time come, which is happening to many organizers across the country right now.
Now tonight you're going to be talking to a room full of college-age students in their upper teens and low 20s.
Mm-hmm.
How do you differ how you speak when you give presentations like this, whether it be to people our age or whether it be to 40, 50, 60-year-old congressmen and women?
I treat everybody the same, quite frankly, because I expect, one of the craziest things that I've realized throughout this experience is that oftentimes we've created a political system where politicians are expected to know a lot about everything, but as a result end up knowing very little about basically everything. So in that sense, I don't really change my tone very much when it comes to speaking to the young people or 40 or 50-year-old congressmen and women, because I realize that it's within anybody's capacity to change the world. It's within anybody's capacity to be a leader within their own community. So I don't change my tone really at all when I'm speaking to Congress or if I'm speaking to the young people. But if I do, it's just knowing that the young people aren't bought and sold, right? It's knowing that Congress has their campaigns funded by organizations that like to control our democracy instead of the American people controlling it.
How do you handle criticism or scrutiny? People say, you're an 18, 19-year-old kid. How do you, stand up to the NRA and then, it's a speck on your shoulder? You can just,
By realizing that a lot of it is heavily rooted in the centuries of ageism that there's been across this country, where constantly, especially for millennials and Gen Zers, we're told, you're too young, right? You don't know what you're talking about. Or even worse than that, it's they always say that young people are too lazy to know anything political. They're always on their phone, they're always on Twitter, they're always on Instagram, always on Facebook, Snapchat, what have you. And they don't really care about anything other than themselves, even though it's quite the opposite of that for our generation. Because I always see how interesting it is when we go out there and are speaking, and then all of a sudden it's no longer that this generation's lazy, it's that this generation doesn't know what they're talking about, or that this generation shouldn't have the right to vote and we should raise the voting age to 21, right? And the way I deal with that criticism is by realizing that if I can't stand up to that ageism that's often expressed just because of how young I am by older generations, nobody else will be able to that follows in my footsteps. Because I want people's opinions to be valued not based off of who they are or what age they are, but based off of their intelligence and their eloquence.
Let's say 10, 20, 30, 40, even 50 years from now, you're still at this. You're still, on the same path. And do you think people are going to change their perception of you over time, or are you still always going to be that 18-year-old kid?
No, I think that perception will definitely change as we become more and more successful. Just as an example, a couple of weeks ago, for the first time in my life, and for many of the people that are watching for the first time in their life, Congress voted and passed the first piece of gun violence prevention legislation in my lifetime in the House of Representatives, right? And if that's not a sign of change, I don't know what is. If the 70 laws that have changed since the shooting at my high school is not a sign of change, I don't know what is. And yeah, I'm going to keep fighting until no one has to live with gun violence in their lives. I hope that within the next, I know that today, if Congress acted and took the proper steps and actually looked at funding gun violence research, looked at putting guns under the Consumer Protection Act and creating these new evidence-based laws at reducing gun violence, we could reduce gun violence in the United States by 90% in the next 15 years.
How do you know that?
Because we know that these laws work. We know that Massachusetts, for example, has the lowest gun death per capita in the United States because they have the strictest laws around gun violence prevention in the United States, right? We know that not coincidentally, but states with the weakest laws, like New Orleans, or Louisiana, have cities like New Orleans, which have the highest per capita death rate of any city in the country by gun violence, right? And we know that these laws work. So if Congress enacted laws today, like, for example, getting licensing for guns and needing a license to even go out and buy a gun, making sure that individuals have to go through a month-long waiting period before they can buy a gun to help reduce the majority of gun deaths, which are suicide, by creating extremist protection orders at a federal level that disarm people like domestic abusers and people that are at risk themselves and others. I know that we could do this because in that time period, even if we didn't know what the solutions are now, if we started funding the research today, we can take action tomorrow.
You've always been about the now, taking action now. Now in your life, you were just recently accepted into Harvard. How are you going to balance Harvard University and the rigor that is, as well as March for Our Lives and all the other work that you do?
We'll see. I'm not sure. I would be lying if I said I knew how. But I'm sure that there's thousands of other young people across the country that are also working just as hard as I am within their own communities, taking action, that are running for city council, that are organizing with their March for Our Lives chapter. And I know that even if I need to take somewhat of a break from this and continue doing this work, but not as much, there's going to be other people that have and will continue to step up to the plate.
Like your classmates?
Yes, like my classmates, like my sister, who had lost 4 friends when she was 14 years old at school that day.
After Harvard, any plan?
I'm not sure because I think about the future and I don't know what it holds, right? Because I know if Congress really started acting today and didn't just do background checks, but went like a couple steps further where it's like actually funding gun violence research, because right now it's still technically against the law to fund gun violence research at the CDC. If we took that action, maybe this issue wouldn't be around by the time I was able to run for office, for example. And maybe, I'm not sure how effective I would be, how effective an individual can be as an activist within politics and balancing whether or not they're going to get corrupted by the same system that has corrupted thousands of others before them.
Do you ever consider running for office at such a young age, even at a local level down in Florida?
I have, but the thing is, I'm going to school in Boston, so I can't really.
But had you not?
Had I not, I definitely would have.
At the local level?
Yeah.
How,
definitely.
A local level obviously can't achieve what your overall goals are. What impact can you make on the local level as compared to state and then federal, of course?
Well, I think by creating, for example, in Florida, there's a coalition of cities that were creating safe storage laws because we know that in over 50% of school shootings, guns come from the parent's house, and it's the parent's gun that's not properly kept, stored, and locked, and there's no laws around that at a federal level right now. So enacting that at a municipal level is something that many cities are doing, and that I would encourage my city to do too, had I been mayor, for example, of it.
What's your biggest message to UConn students and college-age students?
That this issue is not about gun control, it's about stopping kids from dying, right? It's about stopping gun violence at every level, inside and outside of schools, in every zip code, from the south and west side of Chicago, where I have many friends that work around gun violence prevention, to Parkland, Florida as well. Because whether it's 17 people that die in one instance, or if it's 17 individual cases over a weekend, we have to see those things as the same thing. And on top of that, I hope we realize that even if you don't agree with anything that I say around new gun laws, and you truly believe that we just need to fund more mental health, please go out there and advocate for that, because we really do. We do need to fund mental health more, especially in our schools and in our communities. But what's getting people killed is continuing to point the finger and offer solutions, but not offering our actions on those issues, right? When Democrats go out there and say that we need new gun laws, but don't actually take action on those laws, it's getting people killed. When Republicans go out there and say we need to make our schools safer and fund mental health, but then don't do that, it's getting people killed from both sides, right? So we need to make sure both sides are held accountable. We need to make sure law enforcement is doing their job and enforcing the laws that we're creating and the laws that are already in place. And on top of that, being able to fund the research that needs to be done in the first place.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.